Thank you. So again, I'm Laura Ginsberg. I'm the center lead of the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center hosted at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. The Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is one of 3 USDA dairy business initiatives located across the US, with the other 2 being in Wisconsin and Tennessee. And we represent the 10 states of the Northeast, all of New England, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And we're really excited to do this presentation today about the goat and sheep dairy market potential and opportunities. Atlantic Corporation's done a great job of working on this research project with us over the past year, and excited to share the results with everybody today. So I'm going to just remind folks that we're going to keep you on mute. And at the end, there'll be time for questions. Feel free to use the chat if you have questions during the presentation. We can ask those at the end. That way you don't have to keep them in your memory, or we can answer them as we go if Catherine and I know the answers. So there will be time for questions at the end. And again, this will be posted for sharing and later viewing if you want on the Vermont Agency of Agriculture Dairy Business Innovation Center page, of which we'll put the link in the chat for you. I'm going to hand it over to Catherine Donovan to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Catherine Donovan with the Innovation Center, program coordinator. So I'm focused on a lot of our granting opportunities to dairy processors and producers. I just wanted to highlight before we get started today that we do currently have a grant open for goat and sheep dairy supply chain projects. This round is focused on New England states only, so I just want to make that clear from the get-go. But really, projects that will be funded by this grant will develop or expand goat and sheep dairy products or markets that will positively impact multiple businesses within the supply chain. We'll put a link to this grant opportunity in the chat as well. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk it through. We do have the full RFA listed on the website currently. So thanks. And I will pass it over to Ray Bernier with Atlantic Corporation to get us started on the presentation today.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Laura. I'm Ray Bernier. I'm the Senior Project Manager here at Atlantic Corporation. I manage all of our clients' projects start to finish. And with me today is Matt George. Matt is our Data Analytics Manager. He does a lot of our data analysis and visualization for our data projects. He's going to be a part of the presentation as well. So pending any issues with the technical piece of this, I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation up for everyone. Catherine and Laura, can you let me know if you see that okay?
You're good to go.
All right, perfect. I will get started. So Atlantic, we are an agricultural business and economic research and development firm. Our primary goal is to facilitate data-driven decision-making. We do that through a number of ways. We provide primary and secondary market research, technical and market feasibility studies, economic impact studies, amongst many other things, with the process really to identify a specific question or set of questions, collect the data, analyze the data, determine solutions, and then assess our outcomes through reports or tools like we're going to show you today. Some other recent dairy projects we've been a part of, we were a part of the USDA SBIR project to develop a processing solutions tool for farms and value-added producers. You can find that report on our website. We've also been a part of another USDA AFRI project, kind of developing market assessment tools for improved sustainability and profitability of small and medium-sized dairy farms. We've done work with the AFM in the past on a specialty cheese market research report, and for the Virginia Ag Council through some local dairy market research. I've done a number of other projects, but these are some of the most recent ones that we've done recently. The current project that we're going to kind of share the presentation about today, as mentioned, is for the DBIC. for dairy, goat, and sheep market research. We kind of had 4 primary objectives with this project. One being global market conditions research, one being a business-to-business survey of goat and sheep producers, a consumer attitudes and preferences survey across the Northeast, and an interactive data dashboard tool, which I think is what most of you will find most interesting as we get to that in the presentation. Some of the methods that were used for our market research was global market research, primary secondary research that we use to identify key factors that may influence competitiveness and improve your market advantage. We've done B2B survey, end up being 26 total farms that we gathered firsthand accounts on their previous successes and failures, as well as innovations. We've done consumer survey. That was around 597 consumers, gauging their consumer attitudes and preferences about U.S. goat and sheep dairy. And then we developed an interactive data visualization tool for that consumer survey data. There was a lot of findings that we put forth in this project, and you'll see a final report that we'll get to a little bit later. So we tried to key some things together. One thing was the potential marketing strategy, making sure that you're marketing the vitamin and protein-rich alternatives to cow's milk, or to conventional cow's milk, and coming up with a strong marketing strategy that fits your value-added product. Riding the local movement, using that locavore movement, selling through local farmers markets, CSAs, and co-ops. That seems to be common practice and is only growing as of late. Having a strong product focus on high margin value-added products, especially infant formula, ice cream, yogurt, cheese, and nutraceuticals. And then probably the biggest takeaways through the combination of all the objectives is the education of consumers. Most dairy consumers are unaware of the value propositions of goat and sheep products, especially versus other dairy alternatives. And if we can find ways to educate consumers on that, I think we're going to see a boost to that goat and sheep producer market. The B2B survey, it was a 17-question survey, had a number of questions, but included products, pricing, and distribution. There was 26 interviews that were completed, 14 from Vermont, 7 from Maine, 4 from New Hampshire, and 1 from Massachusetts. Looking at that survey and the results, kind of breaking it down to a SWOT. Some of the strengths, most of the producers and farms that had success were in urban local markets where consumers were willing to pay higher premiums. Some of the weaknesses that we found is that most marketing strategies currently being used lacked strong branding. They didn't really have the social media influence that customers were expecting. For opportunities, especially during the pandemic, direct-to-consumer online was kind of skyrocketing, and we expect that to continue post-pandemic. And then more recently, more farm cooperatives seem to be profitable channels. Threats, especially during the B2B survey, I'd say it was close to 90% of the people that responded to the survey indicated that they required more technical and financial resources to help craft and improve their business planning. So it's something we've definitely brought to the attention of any DBIC as well as other agencies. For the consumer survey, this was a 75-question survey around knowledge, consumption, and preference. There were 597 respondents across those states that you see there. What's interesting about this is we've done a whole lot of consumer surveys, and we usually have a 75 to 85% completion rate of people that we reach. For this survey, we had 100%. So that was telling us that people who did receive this survey were engaged and interested in how they could help the goat and sheep industry and complete the survey start to finish. So that was almost very rare, and it almost never happens. So we were kind of excited about that. Looking at that consumer survey, there is a whole large amount of data that comes with that. You'll see that in the final report that we'll point to a little bit later again. But if we kind of put it into 5 key buckets, it was consumption, consumer preference, willingness to pay, packaging and marketing, and availability. And some of the key things we noted in those buckets, 56% of consumers have tried goat, sheep, and cheese, while only 21% have tried sheep milk, and only 11% have tried goat and sheep yogurt. Of consumers who tried sheep products, over half indicated they liked sheep milk, while 70% indicated that they liked sheep yogurt. Goat cheese and yogurt was preferred over goat milk. Consumers are willing to pay the highest premiums for local or organic sheep and goat cheese, This was found through the consumer survey and the secondary research. And consumers are willing to pay on average a 27 to 39% premium depending on the product. We look at packaging and marketing. Most consumers prefer a white plastic quart-sized container for milk. They didn't have too much variation in their package preference for cheese, but they always preferred vacuum sealed. And then in yogurt, it was almost 100% preferred 5 to 6 ounce cups in white plastic, depending on the state that you were looking at. But it was very consistent, 5 to 6 ounces, and usually white plastic. And then availability. I think these all kind of always funnels to this. Most respondents didn't believe that goat and sheep dairy products were available to them to purchase at their usual shopping channels, whether it was a retail store, a local grocery store, or a farmer's market. Less than 10% reported being available. That points back to my earlier point about education. I think if we can drive consumers to knowing about the products and where they can find them, more sampling, I think you'll see an increase at that point in time of value. So pass forwards, kind of we tie all that research in together, and as you see, if you go through the final report, a key roadmap to success is based on pursuing goat and sheep cheese. That was the product that was most likely to succeed here in the US. Another opportunity for untapped potential, consumer data revealed that with proper consumer awareness plans, goat and sheep yogurt could be the most untapped opportunity for producers. We dive into that roadmap a little bit more. If consumers are preferring and most likely to purchase goat cheese, especially if it's organic, that's probably one of the higher margin products to sell. If you've established that being your product, the next key thing would be to establish packaging and branding that consumers want. If it's the vacuum seal that they want to see, if it's brighter colors, humorous branding, focusing on what customers want with your branding strategy is critical. To me, the most critical important piece of all this is step number 3, and that's having a strong marketing plan. Producers need to identify strategies for increasing awareness and educating their consumers on the products through their marketing efforts. And then focusing on that sales strategy we mentioned before, the locavore movement that's currently existing, selling through local farmers markets and CSAs and co-ops, and then increasing that online direct-to-consumer presence, I think is critical. And then engaging with your customers more than ever. Customers are expecting an online social media presence. If farms and producers are able to increase that visibility online, as well as more in-store opportunities with sampling, that's going to tie that roadmap to success together. And then lastly, kind of utilizing the resources that are available. Producers need to actively, look for those financial and technical resources to help them expand. And then when resources are not available, I think producers need to initiate that dialogue with agencies. Groups like any DBIC, amongst the other ones that were named in Wisconsin and Tennessee, are here to help. There's many other organizations that want to help. Sometimes the best thing to do is to advocate for yourself. Tied to the other opportunity about the untapped piece, only 11% of the surveyed consumers had tried goat or sheep yogurt. Yet those who did try it enjoyed it 70% of the time. You take those two pieces together, it's a small sample size with this survey as far as the N, but there looks to be like a strong market opportunity there. That sheep yogurt does fare well with consumers who've tried it. There's just not enough consumers who are aware of it right now and where to buy it. And again, I'll tie it back to the education piece I mentioned before, being able to educate consumers about where those products are, where they can find them in the stores, sampling where they are in the shelf space. All that is critical and could help a farmer or producer carve out their niche. The resources I mentioned before, there's a 60-page report that really goes into the weeds of all the findings for the secondary market research, the B2B survey, and the consumer attitudes and preferences. You can access it via this link here. It's on the NEDBIC website currently as well. And then the second piece to that is there's also a summary report, which kind of is a condensed version of that large report. If you don't want to dive through the weeds, but you want to get some of the key takeaways beyond what we're able to share in this presentation today. And then there's an interactive data dashboard, and that is what we're going to demonstrate momentarily that can be helped to use by producers and farmers for customized market assessments. Before we switch over our screen over to the dashboard, there's some key pieces to think about with the dashboard. we're going to help you kind of identify the types of questions you should be asking when using a data dashboard. We'll go through some demonstrations of the features and functions of a dashboard. Before I'd ever seen one, the first one I saw, I didn't really know what I was looking at. So kind of being able to go through what those features and functions are of a dashboard, whether it's for this project or any dashboard you come across, is helpful. And then, the primary goal of that dashboard, it's intended to help the end user perform customized market assessments. I mentioned some example questions that we'll go through. There's a number of questions you could ask when filtering through the data set of a dashboard, but some that we're going to talk about is how you do some high income customer segmentation, looking at purchasing behavior as a result of sampling, geographic familiarity with value-added products, a willingness to pay by consumer location, and then packaging preference for families. And we'll demonstrate what the question might be that a farmer or producer might ask, and then how you would use the dashboard to find an answer. At this point, I'm going to shift the presentation over to my colleague, Matt George, who's our data analytics manager, as I mentioned, and he's going to go through some examples of the dashboard.
Great. Thanks, Ray. So yeah, at this point, I'll actually open up the dashboard. First, I'll see. I did notice it looks like some of you guys are connected by phone, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this, but thankfully this is being recorded. So hopefully I do a good job with my descriptions that you can at least envision what I'm talking about here. So now that I have the dashboard open, let me quickly do this.
Could I just interrupt for a second? And would you mind shifting your camera over a little bit so that we can see? Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. So now I have the dashboard open. What you're looking at right now is the goat and sheep dairy product dashboard that we developed for this project as kind of one of those additional deliverables. Now, I know some of us may be less familiar with what a data dashboard is, or may never have even seen one. So what is a data dashboard? Well, a data dashboard is much like a dashboard in your car. It's designed to take a bunch of different data from multiple sources and combine those different data sources into one centralized place for easy viewing and deep dive and analysis of those multiple data sets. Through the use of data visualization, data dashboards use things like charts and graphs to take that same underlying data set and allow the individuals and users to perform different cross-analysis to understand the different relationships in their data set. So this dashboard specifically is, like Ray was saying, using the data from our consumer survey of the roughly 600 respondents from across the Northeast states. So you'll see as we begin to dive through some of these visuals that the data is actually representative of what those consumers were saying, specifically about our three products we have here, which are milk, cheese, and yogurt. Now, before I go diving too much into the specifics of this dashboard, I'd like to kind of explain and show how to actually utilize the different functions of this dashboard so that users can get the most out of their searching and insight finding. So on this first page, what we're looking at is actually the landing page. So anytime that you open up or click that link that's shared in our PowerPoint, or if you go to wherever this dashboard is located, this is the first page that you'll see. Now, you may have noticed when I opened up the dashboard, I put it into full screen. Now, to access full screen, you'll see at the bottom right here, hopefully you can see my cursor, but there's a little arrow key, which is our full screen mode. And I'll quickly go out of full screen and then back into full screen. I like to put it in full screen because it's just easier to see things, and especially with some of the smaller text, it allows users to understand what they're looking at better. Once you're in full screen, you'll see that on the landing page here, across the top is just our title, Goat, Sheep, Dairy Product Dashboard. And then in the top left, we have the DBIC Innovation Center logo. This title and logo are all static. They won't change and they're not interactive. However, our milk, cheese, and yogurt categories, these are all interactive. And actually, by clicking on these pictures, you'll be taken to different sections of the dashboard which are representative of their specific product. So if we were to click milk, it would go to the milk section, cheese, et cetera, et cetera. Another button that you might see is at the bottom left. We have a little directions button. Clicking this will, just like the name suggests, take you to the directions, which I'll do now. Now, for those of us who don't get the chance to partake in this presentation, this is where users would go to find out about how to use a dashboard and the different functions and features. But rather than me read all of these off to you guys verbatim, I'd rather dive into the actual dashboard itself to show you the different features in real time. So let's actually do that. Let's dive into our first category here, which was milk. While this loads, here we go. So right now you're looking at the first sheet of our dashboard with all of its different visuals and the actual real data from our consumer survey. So let's kind of go through what we're looking at here. So at the top left here, you'll see once again the DBIC logo. Once again, that's static. That doesn't change. It's not very interactive. At the top middle part, we have our title of the sheet. In this case, we have the average milk consumer. In this case, the average milk consumer is representative of the average consumer within our consumer survey that we did. On the top right, we have some more buttons. So right here, we have a home and next button. They do, as you might think, if you click home, it'll take us right back to our landing page. Return back there. If you hit next, it'll go to the next sheet in the dashboard. And if you hit back, it'll go back to the previous sheet. And there's one other navigation piece that you can use within the dashboard, and that's actually at the bottom center here. You'll see the little arrow keys and 3 of 11 here. If you click the 3 of 11, it'll actually bring up a view of all the different sheets of the dashboard with their titles. And any of these sheets can be clicked on, and it'll zoom you right to that specific section of the dashboard. So once again, if I was to say landing page, take me there. And then if I click milk, it'll bring me back here. So that's some of the navigation pieces. But what about actually some of the features on the actual sheets? And what is all this stuff on the left here? So what we're looking on the left here is actually the filters. Now, what are filters? In this case, filters are actually representative of the different demographic characteristics that we asked respondents for in the consumer survey. So in this case, we asked consumers some questions about their gender, age, race, marital status, education, employment, income, state, and household size. Now, you may notice that each of these have a little arrow key. So if I was to click one of these, say in gender, you'll see we have some 3 little options here and a little box next to them: female, male, and prefer not to answer. Now, before I go clicking and playing with some of these, let's turn our attention to the rest of the sheet, and you'll begin to see that we have some visuals here, some charts. These are the data visualizations and the things that really make a dashboard a dashboard. So in this case, because this is our average milk consumer sheet, these graphs and visuals are all representative of the data that would be, that type of data. So from our survey, anyone who answered questions regarding milk, or in this case, we had some questions about consumer likeness or level of detail desired about milk product origin, that will be shown on this sheet. And then we also have something about milk product offerings and samplings at stores that will also be found on this sheet. So the cool thing about filters is right now our sheet shows the data from all of our respondents. But let's say that you are a producer and you wanted to get a little bit more specific with your findings. So now that we're looking at the gender section, let's just hypothetically say we only wanted to see the data from females who took our survey. So if I was to click this female box, you'll notice that the data just changed in front of you, and it is now representative only the female respondents from our consumer survey. Same thing can be said if I click male, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this only doesn't just work with our gender section, as you might imagine. it would work with age. Let's say we wanted to look at respondents between the ages of 35 to 44. We can do that as well. Just one quick click. Now this data is now representative of only the respondents that were that identified themselves between the ages of 35 to 44. Now that's pretty specialized, age category there. Let's say that as a producer, you maybe wanted to expand that and look at, individuals between the ages of 18 to 44. Well, the filters function actually has a cool little thing where you can control click additional boxes to show additional data categories. So I'll do that right now in front of you. I will control click our 18 to 24 and our 25 to 34. And now our data is representative of all the respondents between the ages of 18 to 44. And what's even cooler than that is you can use several of these filters all at the same time. So if we keep this age category the same, and we go back to our gender filter, and let's say we wanted to see those female respondents again, we click female, and let's hypothetically say we were looking in the state of, hold on, let me let this load, Massachusetts. We can all do that with just a few clicks. Now, right now, what we're looking at is all the females from Massachusetts who are between the ages of 18 to 44. This is their individual data and what they responded with in our survey. So that's really, really powerful stuff for a producer who wants to get specific with their marketing strategy and their branding to really identify key characteristics of specific target audiences. And if you ever did get lost with the filtering or clicking around, there is this reset filters button, which is kind of like the saving grace button. Just click it at any time and everything will go right back to normal, just like the base sheet. The great thing about this dashboard is it's designed, you can't break it, so don't ever feel like you're going to break it. I want you to play with it, just see what you can find. And anytime you feel like you've gone too far, just hit the reset filters button and you'll be taken back to square zero. Now, there is one more feature I'd like to show you before we kind of move into the next section of the dashboard presentation here. And that is any of these charts or visuals that have this little information symbol, which is just a circle with a little eye in the corner here. These visuals are actually also interactive with the rest of the visuals within our dashboard. So what I mean by that is let's take a look at our top right visual here. One of the questions we asked consumers was, have you ever tried milk samplings offered at retail stores? In this case, across all of our data set, 36% of our respondents stated yes, they have tried samplings, and roughly 63% say they have not. Now let's go back to that hypothetical producer again, and maybe they want to only look at the respondents who did say they've tried milk samplings offered at retail stores. Well, one cool thing that we can do with this graph is we can actually select the part of the graph that is only representative of those respondents who have tried samplings at retail stores. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the rest of the graphs changed. And now even our different note cards changed. And now the data is only representative of those respondents that have stated they've tried samplings offered at retail stores. And the coolest thing of all is this feature can actually be utilized with our filters feature. So we could go ahead and hit gender, female, do those different age categories from the state of Massachusetts. And now you have a really, really powerful tool right here where you're just looking at this specific subset of our data set, where you're looking at only the consumers who stated they've tried samplings at retail stores, who identify themselves as female, ages between 35 to 44 from the state of Massachusetts. So now that we know what a dashboard is and how to use it, I think at this point, I'm going to loop back in Ray, who is going to act as our pseudo goat producer, who will begin to kind of ask me some questions on that might help to give us a better idea of how another producer might utilize this dashboard to find their own findings.
Perfect, thanks, Matt. So I asked Matt to kind of go through those detailed instructions. I think it's important for when you go back to use this on your own and you want to play with the data to have a strong kind of background as to how to click things and how to move through the dashboard and be able to find things. And one of my most important tools is the reset filters button, because I get a little crazy with the data sometimes and I start filtering down to very specific customers, and then I realize that I've gone too far and have to reset it. So as Matt mentioned, how do we take kind of using this dashboard and then process it in a real life, what if scenario? So I'll bounce back and forth here between Matt and I, as if I were a data producer and I was deciding, or I was targeting a certain question, and how we'd use the dashboard to find that answer. So for me, if I was selling goat sheep milk and I was in an area that had a lot of high income earners, and I was really curious as to how those high income earners responded to this survey and maybe what they'd be willing to pay for milk, how would we use the dashboard to find that, Matt?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ray. So actually in the dashboard, if we go ahead and back down to that navigation feature at the bottom here, where we're looking at those tabs, one of our sheets is actually titled Milk Expenditure. Now, when we click Milk Expenditure, this sheet is actually all the data associated with, yep, you guessed it, milk expenditure. So Ray specifically posed a question about high income earners and sort of their willingness to pay for milk that's produced locally. Well, if we take a look at our bottom center graph here, we actually have the original question that was posed to consumers, which states, how much are you willing to pay for the following types of milk if they are produced locally? If more or less, please indicate the percentage. So if we take a look at our visual here, we have some bars in a light green, and then we have some bars in a darker blue. Those bars in the light greenish are actually those consumers that stated they would pay less, and then that percentage is their average of how much they would pay less. And then in the darker blue there, we have the consumers who are willing to pay more, and then their average percentage of how much they'd be willing to pay more. So one of the things Ray had also stated was he was looking at high income earners. So we actually have a filter for that in this income section. So if we go ahead and open up that income section, and for hypothetical purposes, we'll state that a high income earner is defined as someone who makes over $100,000 per year or more. What we'll do is we'll click 100,000. And then we have a few other categories that will use that control function to add in 150,000 or more and 200,000 or more. Now we're looking at all the respondents who make over $100,000 per year or more. And let's go ahead and analyze our graph. So now it shows that if we're only specifically going to look at the willingness to pay more for locally produced cow milk, there's a 46% additional increase of willingness to pay. For sheep milk, there's a 46% increase as well. And then for goat milk, there's a 45% increase. So just in a few clicks, you can see kind of how powerful the data dashboard can be.
Thanks, Matt. And I think, one important thing to note on the dashboard when you're starting to filter some of this data and you're starting to ask these questions and trying to find answers, one thing you can always do is you can hover over a specific data point, and it'll give you a little more information about that data point. And that's important when you're trying to make a strategic decision using a dashboard and you're talking about, maybe high income earners. You'll see here there are customers who would pay less. I think that ties back to our research, as you'll find the final report about educating consumers. Once they're educated, they tend to want to pay more for the product. But this will give you a quick snapshot of how many of those respondents actually answered that question. So you can see that there might be more consumers right now who would pay less, but once you've targeted that consumer who will pay more, they will pay up 46% more or 45% more for that product. So that's important that you can really hone in on exactly who your customer is. Another example of a question, if I was selling cheese, for example, and I was curious as to how male respondents answered our questions based on sampling in a store, if they're more likely to purchase a product after sampling or not. How would we use the dashboard for that, Matt?
Yeah, good question, Ray. So right now we're in the milk section, but Ray had posed a question about cheese. So let me go ahead and quickly reset this. And then we can go ahead and look into our cheese section. So just like the milk section, we have our average cheese consumer here. And we had a question about sampling, specifically at the top right here, we have some visuals about the number of consumers who have tried cheese sampling offered at retail stores. And then we have a little text box below, which shows the percentage of consumers who actually purchased those sampled products after trying them in store. So across all of our data set, it shows that 72% of consumers stated they have tried cheese samplings offered at stores. And then 33% of those individuals stated they have purchased their sampled products after trying them. But Ray's question was specifically about male consumers. So once again, we'll jump over to our filter section, go to our gender box, and hit male. And we'll see that 72% of our respondents stated that they had tried cheese samplings offered at retail stores, and 31.6% of those stated they had purchased those sampled products after trying them within store.
And if we wanted to compare that to female, we just changed the filter, correct?
Exactly. So if you wanted to just make a quick analysis, we can just click on over to female, and you'll see that females have a slightly higher tendency to try samplings in store at about 73%, and a slightly higher percentage chance of purchasing those sampled products at 34.35%.
Perfect, thanks, Matt. And we'll continue on with a couple more examples. One could be if you really want to target into a specific geographic reach, and you were, we'll use Vermont right now, and you were producing Vermont cheese, specifically goat or sheep cheese, and you were curious if consumers are aware of your operation. There's a strong tendency that consumers are aware, the consumers who are aware of the operations and who are producing the product are more likely to buy the product. So maybe you want to target it on those customers. How would we use the dashboard to kind of lock in on the Vermont consumers and their understanding and awareness of the operation itself?
Yeah, great question, Ray. So another question that we ask consumers is actually shown over here in the black text. We specifically asked them, how unfamiliar or familiar are you with dairy farms and businesses that produce the cheese products you purchase? This was done on a scale system. 1 equaled very unfamiliar, 10 equaled very familiar. And you can see at the bottom here in our little text box, the average familiarity rating came out to about 4.8. And that's once again, across all of our 600 respondents, that was their average familiarity rating. Now, Ray had a specific question about Vermont consumers. So if we jump over to our filters and we hit state and we go to Vermont, you'll notice that our familiarity rating went from about a 4.8, I believe, to 5.46. That would suggest that consumers within the state of Vermont are slightly more aware of the local dairy farms and businesses that produce the cheese products they purchase.
Perfect. And you can then sometimes take those to a level deeper, and when you're looking at the graphs, there's the level of detail desired about cheese product origin, and you see in the pie chart the one that has the highest percentages that they care about having the state located on their branding and packaging. So you put the farm and the location, and if the customer can see that this was produced at such and such farm located in this state, that's going to increase their willingness. We'll look at a second, or let's say a third question kind of tied to that. Yeah. If consumers who are looking at buying cheese, specifically sheep cheese, and I'm a producer and I'm deciding which state I may want to sell to, and I want to sell to the state that's got the highest willingness to pay, how would we use the dashboard to find that? Yeah, sure.
So once again, if we go ahead and go through our different navigation pane, we have a sheet called Cheese Expenditure. So if we open up Cheese Expenditure, this is all of our data associated with consumer cheese expenditure. And Ray had suggested asking about which state kind of had the highest willingness to pay for our sheep and goat cheese products. Well, if you take a look at our bottom left visual here, we actually ask consumers, how much are you willing to pay for the following types of cheese compared to cow cheese? If more or less, please indicate the percentage. So kind of just like that first question, if we take a look at our visual, our sort of a light greenish here is those individuals who indicated they would pay less, and then the associated percentage. And then in the darker blue there, we have the individuals who suggested they would pay more, and then what that percentage equated to. So right now we're only worried about the individuals who are willing to pay more for our products. And we were looking at that from a state level view. So if we go ahead and open up our state filter, we can go ahead and start cycling through our states. And I would like for you guys as viewers to kind of pay attention to that darker blue bar and watch those percentages to see which one kind of really stands out. So I'll just start with Connecticut, and we'll see that Connecticut has a willingness to pay more of 17% and 13% respectively. Maine at 24 and I believe that's 14%. Massachusetts 43 and 29. New Hampshire 11 and 9. New Jersey 55 and 41. New York 47 and 43. Rhode Island 23 and 17. Vermont 16 and 15. Now, I think I caught New Jersey as having the highest willingness to pay more, specifically for that sheep producer that Ray was talking about, at roughly 55% more willingness to pay in the state of New Jersey. And then if we were to kind of add to that and say we're that hypothetical goat producer, I think New York beat out New Jersey just barely at 43%. Yes.
Perfect, thanks, Matt. And so that's another great way to utilize the dashboard to pinpoint on that customer segmentation and kind of decide, you know, if you were already producing that cheese product and you were exploring different markets, kind of targeting where those consumers would pay more. This is a great resource to do so. We'll do one more example. If I was selling yogurt and I was really struggling with my packaging, and I wasn't sure what size packaging or what color packaging I should do. How would I use the dashboard to determine maybe what the certain family likes to see in their packaging? Specifically, say if I was a Rhode Island producer and I was already selling in Rhode Island.
Yeah, good question, Ray. So let me quickly reset here, and then I'll take you to the yogurt section. Ray had a specific question about packaging preference. So we have a sheet titled Yogurt Purchase Preference. This sheet has different data metrics on yogurt type preference, yogurt package preference, and yogurt package size preference. Now, Ray had a question about Rhode Island families, specifically about a package type and package size preference. So we have two visuals that are applicable there, our middle one here and our bottom one. Our middle one showing yogurt package preference across all of our different respondents, and our bottom one showing yogurt package size preference. So let's go ahead and start using our filters to target that Rhode Island family. So if we go to state, hit Rhode Island, and then this will be the first time we get to use this filter, which is our household size. This is acting as a slider, so the slider can be moved, or these little text box can be edited manually just by using your number key. But I'll use the filter, the slider here. And in this case, we'll consider a family of a household size of 3 or more family members. So if we take a look at what happened to our graphs, it'll show that the predominant package size preference for a Rhode Island family is in a white plastic container at roughly 2/3, and the predominantly package size preference was a 5 to 6 ounce cup at 72%, showing us that the Rhode Island family prefers a yogurt container in a white plastic in a 5 to 6 ounce cup size.
And if we wanted to compare that quickly to Vermont, we just change the state.
Exactly. So just like that. And you can see that Vermont has a even larger preference for a white plastic container at almost 90%. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. So that's just another example again of how you can take back those buckets I talked about in the presentation before and look, focusing on packaging and your product and see what consumers said within this survey. There are hundreds of more examples like that we could go through. But for me, and most of the time when we do these different dashboard presentations, we find some of the greatest value is what happens after the presentation, and people are able to go and start filtering through this data themselves and finding answers to questions that they might have. And so I think that's probably the best next step for anyone that's kind of watching this presentation or will watch this, is to utilize the dashboard, start really diving through certain things and seeing if you can find answers based on how we've kind of shown that process. So at this point, I'm going to switch back to the presentation, and we'll take any questions that you may have about the entire project. It could be about the methods that were used, or we can jump back to this dashboard and do anything with this dashboard that you may want to see.
I think we want to open back up the Teams.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, I think you just have to stop screen sharing.
Perfect.
All right, do I have any questions?
I see a question from, it looks like Tubbs Crossing Farm. Yes, the data is from the survey of the 600 consumers. Oh, it looks like that answered.
Yep, and now there's a new question about how often will the data be updated or revised?
I would say I would point that back to Laura, depending on the intent and mission of any DBIC and where they want to see this data. I think we were at a critical time with this project, with obviously things that were happening in the world with COVID. And so this survey, amongst many others that we've done, we've been curious how some of this data may change post-pandemic. So there's definitely opportunities for that.
And our goal is to update it periodically as funding is available and as market conditions change. So potentially in like the 3 to 5 year time frame, unless markets really change dramatically in the near term as markets continue to reopen from the pandemic shutdowns. Then there's a question about how does someone find a copy of the survey questions? Is that something that we can post?
Yeah, the survey questions are in that final report, which you'll find on DBIC's website. In the appendix, there's an appendix that lists all the survey questions that were asked.
If anybody on the phone has joined us, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question since you don't have access to the chat.
And I believe if you are on the phone, you'll have to use *6 to unmute, I believe.
Thanks, Catherine. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, while people might be thinking of questions, when we've done these in the past, I'd say more often than not, I get all or the majority of my questions post presentation. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure Laura will begin getting emails or things that they have questions about, or they want to know how something works, and we're totally open to answering any of those. You can email us directly. I can put my email in this chat, or you can reach out through Laura and she can connect on any questions that you might have, and I'll put my email in the chat now.
I've got a question for you, Ray. or Matt as well. In doing this research, knowing that you've done a lot of other research with the USDA on dairy trends and consumer perception and interest, was there anything that was particularly surprising in focusing on the goat and sheep portions of the dairy industry outside of what we normally consider with the larger cow sector?
Yeah, I would say it's tied to the branding probably being the most out there, usually on your traditional cows milk products, whether it's just milk or it's cheese or it's yogurt. They want very bland and plain branding where it's just, the business logo. It's usually in white, not much color to it, where everything on the secondary research and when we talk to consumers for the survey, they seem to think when there's these niche products, they want more colorful, bright, vibrant branding and packaging, and they expected to see more humor and more association with the brand through social media platforms. That seemed to be more prevalent. I mentioned that USDA project that was funded. That was a 20,000 consumer survey, and so we were able to look at some of the pieces that crossed both paths, and that was one thing that really stuck out was on that branding and packaging. The other one wasn't tied necessarily to the consumer survey, but it's prevalent basically everywhere, and that's that the producers that we talked to, they really were looking for assistance in that area. So the area that seemed to be the weakest was also an area that they seemed to want and require the most help. So I think being able to do that for them would drastically improve that area.
Thanks, that's great feedback. There's a question about if you see a trend towards requests for glass or non-plastic containers.
Yeah, I honestly, so not so much through the findings of this project, and again, when you're doing consumer surveys, we had a sample of 600. It can be really skewed towards who's responding to the survey, and my expectation was that there was going to be more of a trend towards glass. We saw that more with conventional cow's milk and some of our other studies, but it didn't seem to be the case for this sample size. That they seem to still prefer plastic versus glass, which I expected to see more glass than we did. Not so much for other non-plastic containers. Across all of our research projects, I haven't seen that. If there's been a shift from plastic, it's usually going back to the original glass approach.
Thanks. Then another question regarding packaging. Do you feel like the consumers wanted the sheep and goat products to look and or feel like cow dairy products?
We had to use most of the secondary research to try to really assess that. We weren't able to dive that deep on the consumer survey with those questions without giving the consumer too many questions to answer. But through what we did find in the secondary research, I would actually say no. They want something that's a little more out there that separates them, that would really attract them and pull them from the shelf space where they're shopping at. That says, I'm going to shift from this, traditional Oakhurst dairy product to so-and-so's farms product instead.
Thanks. Yeah, again, really good feedback about marketing differentiation and potential there for the sheep and goat producers. Any last questions? Oh, a great question from Carol. Is supply meeting demand?
Good question. I would say, again, this is one of the reasons why I would advocate for a potential follow-up to this in time as post-pandemic was kind of subsiding a little bit, because I would say supply was much higher than demand in the last 12 months. I bet if we would have asked a specific question about the last 12 months, that would have really shown through. So I think that's starting to cross back to the direction and come more to the center median at this point in time, but I wouldn't be able to give you a solid answer on that until we could have a follow-up assessment and really look. But I say we're trending more towards demand being there, more for cheese than for milk and yogurt. Consumers, if they were going to try a goat and sheep product, they were going to try cheese first before they would try milk and yogurt. Although, like I pointed out, people who did try yogurt liked it once they tried it. They just didn't know where to find it. They hadn't really sampled it. And being able to educate them on it I actually tried my first sheep yogurt about 2 weeks ago because I wanted to make sure I had tried it. So I actually liked it, but I would have never have kind of gone to look for it had someone not educated me on it. And this project was that for me.
All right, well, I think we'll, oh, Lee has a question. Did you discover any stigmas?
I would say that they believe it's expensive, yet they say they haven't purchased it. So it was a strange thing that they said that that they believe the product would be expensive, but then they would report that they haven't purchased the product after sampling it or something like that. So I thought it was kind of odd that they would point out such a high cost, yet they maybe have never purchased it or really even walked by it on the shelf to know. So I think there's some understanding that it's way more expensive, and in some cases it's not. Some cases it might be, but that seems to be something that kind of stood out.
It looks like we've got another question coming in from Tom, our colleague at the Wisconsin Center. Did you notice any regional availability differences?
So because, again, using this sample size where we're just focusing on that Northeast region as a whole, I wouldn't really cross-reference that with other regional preferences with other projects, sorry. But if you, I can provide a link for our national survey that we did, which is all dairy. It wasn't focusing just on sheep, but you'll see it's a GIS mapping tool, and you can see some regional preferences where the north central, northeast, and surprisingly a little bit more southwest had some kind of outliers and some different preferences versus the rest of the country. But we didn't obviously do beyond northeast on this sample size, so I wouldn't give you any statistically relevant differences here.
Thanks. We'll take Christine's question as the last one. Were there any environmental concerns expressed of sheep or goat dairy, similar to concerns of cow dairy?
Did we ask a specific question on that? Do you remember, Matt, in the dashboard? I don't think we did on this.
No.
This survey. I don't think we specifically asked on environmental concerns on this. Again, when you have a smaller sample, if you start bombarding consumers with too much questions, they don't want to respond or they rush through their answers. So we had to be pretty selective on this one. But we did ask that on our national survey, and there were some environmental concerns with cows products and methane. So I'm sure if we did that question here, I'm going to guess it would have probably been pretty similar.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you again so much for this insightful presentation and the walk through the dashboard. And really just want to thank Atlantic, Ray, and your crew for the work that you did here. Really valuable outcomes and resource for the sheep and goat dairy community across the region and possibly beyond. So again, if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to email them to me or to Ray, and we will be posting the link to this video here shortly. So feel free to send it along to anyone else who may be interested. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining.